Russia is worried, very worried. 135,000 troops have been killed or wounded. It could be more. It is all slightly more excessive than we've seen beforehand, between Russian fantasy and Ukrainian reality. A vulnerable spot for Putin. As winter approaches, is this one last roll of the dice? It's simply too big a defeat to walk away from. While Zelensky hammers Putin's energy networks, and Donald Trump's huge sanctions slowly begin to bite Russia's war machine, a gear change is happening on the front line. We're now seeing Putin's desperate winter strategy emerging. For Ukraine, there have been worrying developments. In Kupiansk and Pokrovsk, fierce fighting is taking place, and the fog of war has descended, making reporting very difficult. However, things may not appear as bad as they first seem. In fact, it may be playing into Ukraine's hands. As winter approaches, is this one last roll of the dice from Mad Vlad? A meat-grinding attempt to claw some semblance of a victory before the ice and snow freezes the current mud-filled battlefield. Meanwhile, a critical occupied area is looking more and more exposed and vulnerable. We'll explore all of this and what comes next for Ukraine in this edition of Battle Plans Exposed. First, let's take a look at what's been happening on the front lines. In Pokrovsk, troops of Ukraine's 79th Air Assault Brigade have approached a building occupied by Russian forces. They destroyed it with a TM62M mine. That's an anti-tank mine designed to take out 60 to 70 tons of heavy metal, but look at the effect it has on the building. Several Russian soldiers were also captured and eliminated during the operation. Ukrainian forces continued to clear the city block by block. So here we have an example of further Russian war crimes. Two civilians, a man and an old man from the village of Petropavlovka, east of Kupiansk, decide to approach the Russian positions with white flags. We're not going to show you the whole video, but the Russians didn't respect the white flag and killed both of them very violently. So Ukraine continues its operational level attacks. An Albatros M small anti-submarine ship from the Russian Black Sea Fleet was on fire in Sevastopol, and we can just see the smoke rising from the ship after a successful Ukrainian drone attack, we believe. And I think this is indicative of Crimea becoming more and more vulnerable as the Ukrainians increase their attacks against Russian military bases, air defenses, logistic infrastructure, airfields, and the surrounding areas. And let's move on to the surrounding areas now. Of course, one of the big surrounding areas is at sea. And here we have the Ukrainians with seaborne drones and airborne drones attacking one of the oil rigs that's just off the Crimean coast. The oil rig has been used for surveillance purposes, looking out into the Black Sea, trying to monitor Ukrainian activity. It had Russian commandos on board. They have all allegedly been killed. Of course, Russia's disputed the account by distributing a video that alleges the Ukrainian naval boat was destroyed by a Lancet drone, but Kyiv's forces said the video actually showed them deploying a kamikaze drone quite successfully. It shows how disinformation is a critical part of this conflict. So let's take a look at Pokrovsk in the Donbas. Russia has assigned about 170,000 soldiers to capture the town. It's been under siege for 18 months. We've spoken before about the Russian strategy, the cauldron that there is surrounding it as they try and close the edges in. Now, Russia has made advances inside the city. They're slowly but surely trying to capture it block by block. They're infiltrating areas, setting up observation posts in the town. And bear in mind the amount of soldiers and equipment Putin has expended so far in the 18-month battle. The town, to use some American parlance I heard in another conflict I was part of, has been rubbleized. The buildings have been destroyed. The logistic nodes that were so important, as people called Pokrovsk strategically vital, have been effectively nullified. The railway lines are not working. The roads are almost impassable. Some Ukrainian figures suggest in the battle for Pokrovsk alone, 135,000 troops have been killed or wounded. It could be more. And we know to try and capture through the whole of the area of the disputed Donbas, British military intelligence or defence intelligence have suggested at current advance rates it would take another 4 years and 2 million Russian casualties. There are reports from South Korean intelligence that North Korea is sending another 5,000 to 10,000 troops to help Putin. While they may not be on the front line, and the reports are suggesting they're going to be put in the border regions to try and allow the Russians to then send more of their troops to the front line. What does this tell us about the sustainability of Putin's manpower? Capturing Pokrovsk has become something more for Russia, something symbolic, kind of like Bakhmut was a few years ago. Whilst it was once a key logistic hub, now, after 18 months of siege and enormous losses, it is a critical target for Putin to sell victory to his own people. After expending staggering amounts of men and material, it's a face-saving objective, a victory Putin absolutely must deliver. Militarily, it's a pile of rubble. Its logistic routes are close to impassable. It will remain impassable even if Russia captures the town because of Ukrainian artillery and drones. Given the amount of soldiers and equipment expended, it's simply too big a defeat to walk away from. And the Ukrainians have been holding on successfully for the last 18 months, taking large casualties themselves. But as the Russians start to close in and capture areas and put additional pressure on it, General Budanov, the head of the HUR or GUR, the names are interchangeable, led a daring air mobile commando raid to take some of the pressure off the defenders of Pokrovsk by raiding Russian positions on the flanks and in particular into the southern edges of the city. As a general, he likes to keep his hand in from time to time. He's a commando by background, but he leads from the front. I can be certain that Ukraine will have set up a plan for any withdrawal from Pokrovsk because it will be a military planned operation, a planned withdrawal. A retreat is sometimes used, but trading space for time is a military tactic. Withdrawing after 18 months of holding the world's second largest army to almost stalemate is not a defeat. And the Ukrainians will have prepared further defensive positions further back, which will take the Russians another 12, 18, 24 months to try and capture. Ukraine has seized the territory that Russia took in a breakthrough earlier this year, to the north of the cauldron in Pokrovsk, and that was during the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska. But while Ukraine makes a valiant stand, to the north there's an increase in tempo from Russia. A worrying development has emerged in Kupiansk, which is just here. Is this a feint or a diversion or a genuine push? Paving the way to Kharkiv in the north, we have to ask, is this a simple attempt to stretch Ukraine's defences? This front line is massive. Aberdeen to London and a little bit more. Or is it a dangerous new path for Russia to launch a major winter offensive? But Russia has not been able to concentrate forces effectively in this war to date. There's nothing to suggest they can do it now. The numbers game always favours the defender. In military tactics, the attacker doctrinally should be at least 3 times the strength of any defender. The Russians are attacking in small numbers of 2, 4, 6 little groups going in. They cannot concentrate their forces, and in this area in particular, in the winter months, with the rivers that are running through it and the ground that's there, it will be impassable for vehicles. So they're not going to be able to push a concentrated, heavy military force through here to break through and try and influence Kharkiv. This is more likely a bluff. So now we're into Putin's vital bridgehead of Crimea. Of course, occupied by the Russians since 2014. Putin has built the Crimean bridge. We've got the Black Sea and we've got Sevastopol. Ukrainian attacks on Crimea, a vulnerable spot for Putin. Is it too expensive for him to continue to defend? He's wanted to open up this land bridge up to Russia, which is why he's putting the effort into the Donbas region and the areas that he's occupied. He's got the Kerch Bridge, which remains vulnerable. Crimea is totally reliant on support from outside for water and for fuel and other supplies. Ukraine's military intelligence continues to hit key Russian air defense assets in occupied Crimea. These are expensive. They're hard to replace pieces of equipment. And looking at the geography of the area, this appears to be hard to defend with little time to track incoming missiles. The flight times from Ukraine into Crimea are very short indeed. The ranges for especially the longer range Ukrainian drones make it easier and easier for the Ukrainians to hit. The use of highly technical Western missiles, the Storm Shadow or the French Scalp, make accuracy not a problem now. And of course, we've seen the audacious attacks to date on the Kerch Bridge, but we're also seeing the Ukrainians trying to blind the Russian observation out into the Black Sea, as we described with the Ukrainian attacks on the Saivash drilling rig that was providing surveillance for any incoming Ukrainian attacks into the north of Crimea and movement down into the Black Sea. Crimea is looking increasingly vulnerable. But because the Russians have held it from 2014, because the Russians had their Black Sea fleet traditionally based at Sevastopol, because the Russian elite had bought their dachas and holiday houses along the beaches of Crimea, it is seen by Putin as a symbol of Russian influence into what is recognized internationally, and rightly so, as part of Ukraine. Crimea emotionally is something that Putin will not want to give up at any cost. And even if he goes and tries to sue for a peace deal at some stage in the future, the last thing that he will want to try and negotiate away is Crimea. Finally, let's have a look at the weapons and technology coming online. Allegedly, this is a picture of the Skyfall nuclear-powered cruise missile with infinite range that the Russians have, for the first time in a number of years, successfully tested, according to them. Then we have the Poseidon, the Doomsday nuclear torpedo. But this is an artist's impression. Whether it is a torpedo or whether it is a submarine-type vessel with a large nuclear warhead on it is not 100% clear at the moment. And finally, we have the Ukrainian-produced Sting drone. So let's contrast between Russian fantasy and Ukrainian reality. On one side, the hugely terrifying but unproven Skyfall missile. Now the Skyfall, it's nuclear powered. It's a ramjet. That means that it takes air in, compresses it, heats it up enormously, and that's where the nuclear reactor comes in. And that heat causes the air to expand in additional pressure, and it pushes out the engine in the back. That means that the nuclear reactor that is heating it up has to be small enough to go on an airframe like this. That's expensive, very expensive to produce. It also means that the nuclear shielding around the reactor is going to be minimal, because that's the heavy bit. And therefore it means that as this is flying around, it will be emitting a big beacon for any nuclear detector saying, this is where I am. It will also be contaminating the air that is being pushed out the back with radioactive isotopes, and therefore saying, this is where I am by a big nuclear trail as it goes around the world. And of course, if you put a conventional warhead on it, you've just turned this into a dirty bomb. It therefore has to be with a nuclear warhead on it. So as soon as that gets launched and is flying around the world, leaving its nuclear trail for everyone to watch, Western forces will be put on, Western nuclear forces will be put on very high alert. This doesn't provide anything. In fact, it provides a lot less capability than current Russian intercontinental or medium-range ballistic missiles can. It's a bit of a farce. And because it's a cruise missile, it's flying subsonically, at 500 miles an hour. It flies close to the ground, but if it's being observed from space, which a lot of the nuclear detectors can do, then it's not going to hide. It's slow, it makes it very vulnerable. It may be able to stay aloft for a long time, but if you can watch it for a long time, you can then predict where to put your air defense capabilities, and you've got time to move them into place. It is nothing more than Russian technology-related propaganda. Then we have the Poseidon nuclear submarine, or nuclear torpedo, the Doomsday weapon that the Kremlin calls it. And in fact, Russian newspapers have turned around and said that it could sink Great Britain with one missile. Of course it can't. And why would you want to try and swamp a city or an island with a tsunami created by a nuclear explosion when you can actually destroy it from an intercontinental ballistic or medium-range ballistic missile? Again, it's technological mumbo-jumbo and fantasy. However, we now get into some technological reality. We have Ukraine leading the military industry with cheap, effective, Western-backed innovation. The Sting drone. The Sting is a maneuverable drone that can be launched from any flat surface. It doesn't require a catapult. It's designed for rapid deployment, rapid takeoff, and gaining altitude as quickly as possible up to its target. It is an anti-drone drone. Some reports indicate it can reach speeds of over 100 miles an hour, with newer modifications reportedly hitting up to 195 miles an hour. Its guidance is typically manually piloted, but it will be using technological surveillance and potentially artificial intelligence to get it into the targets it's attacking. A ground-based operator controls the drone using virtual reality goggles for the first-person view, allowing for high-precision maneuvering and dogfighting if necessary. Targeting, the drone is equipped with advanced cameras, including thermal imaging, like the Dombas system, which is critical for detecting and tracking targets like the Shahad drones, especially at night or in challenging visual conditions. The Sting acts like a loitering munition or a kamikaze drone itself. Its primary method of destroying the enemy drone is to crash into it, a kinetic strike. A drone-type hit-ile, effectively destroying slower-moving targets. A core principle of the Sting is its low cost compared to traditional surface-to-air missiles or air-to-air missiles. The air defense missiles launched from F-16s, the air defense missiles that are launched from Patriot and other Western-supplied air defense capabilities cost up to millions of dollars a piece to fire against a Shahad drone that costs $100,000. These are much more cost effective. This allows Ukraine to conserve its expensive air defense missiles for higher value targets, its cruise missiles, its Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, the ballistic missiles that Russia is firing at civilian targets. Now, what does this kinetic interceptor mean for the future of warfare? This is something that the Ukrainians are exporting, not because of its pink color. This was pink because allegedly it was supplied to an all-female anti-drone unit in Ukraine. However, we have to remember the Ukrainian Flamingo missile, when it first came out, was called the Flamingo because it was pink. But no, this is something that Ukraine is potentially exporting. NATO is very interested in this extremely cost-effective counter-drone capability. So, are the Russians worried? Well, there are a few indications that they are. We're hearing an increase of their nuclear saber rattling. The Skyfall nuclear-powered cruise missile, the Poseidon Doomsday torpedo, and then the information war that we're seeing around the Ukrainian commando raids into Pokrovsk, trying to emphasize that to the Russian commanders that the reports that are coming up from the ground that Russia is defeating the Ukrainians, they're trying to emphasize that in the information domain. It is all slightly more excessive than we've seen beforehand. False reporting up the Russian chain of command is something we've seen the whole way through. And of course, we then got pressures on the Russian economy. Only today, as we're recording this in the Russian newspapers, they're talking of Chinese imports of Russian oil down 21% and the pressure that that is putting on the economy. So to conclude, Russia is worried, very worried. So that's all for battle plans this week. If you've got any points, please put them in the comments below. Tell us what you'd like us to explain and understand. And of course, hit like and subscribe to get early access to all of our videos. Thank you. Goodbye.